When a veteran faced the scorn of seemingly successful businessmen, the bus passengers were outraged, yet no one spoke up. It was the driver who intervened, defending him, and in doing so lost his job. His life seemed to spiral into despair. However, this veteran was no ordinary man. His quiet influence became the catalyst that reshaped the bus driver's life, guiding him toward his true calling, championing the rights of veterans. Calvin Brooks had navigated the streets of Jacksonville on Bus 17 for almost 15 years. Each morning, just before the city stirred from its sleep, he'd settle into the driver's seat, adjust his mirror, and embark on his route through a city that rarely acknowledged those like him. The quiet workers, the unseen gears that kept everything running. He was a man of few words, but he saw everything. The tired factory workers rubbing sleep from their eyes, the single mothers trying to entertain their kids with just a cracked phone, the young Marines heading to base with new boots and squared shoulders, and the veterans. Men like his own father, who had given their all for their country, now quietly occupied the back of his bus, trying to disappear into a world that no longer seemed to want them. His father, a proud Marine, had returned from war with invisible scars. Calvin had witnessed his struggles, the way he flinched at loud noises, the tremor in his hands when he thought no one was watching. But the hardest part was how people treated him as if he were invisible. Calvin never forgot. He'd made a silent vow long ago. As long as he was behind the wheel, no veteran on his bus would feel forgotten. That's why the small American flag on his dashboard wasn't just decor. It was a potent reminder. This morning, the rain had begun early, drumming a steady rhythm against the windshield as he pulled up to his first stop. The usual crowd shuffled in, offering quiet nods and murmured greetings. At the next stop, however, a man boarded who immediately captured Calvin's attention. He was older, his frame still robust despite the years etched onto his shoulders. His face was lined, his jaw set with a soldier's quiet discipline. He wore a faded military jacket, its patches barely visible, and a plain baseball cap pulled low. Calvin didn't need to ask questions. He instinctively recognized the way the man surveyed the bus before choosing his seat, the precise, calculated movements. A kind of awareness that lingers decades after leaving the battlefield. The man dropped his fare into the box, offering Calvin a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. Calvin returned it. The bus rumbled forward, the engine's familiar hum a comfort as the rain blurred the city outside. Calvin's hands rested on the wheel, his eyes occasionally flicking to the mirror. The man sat near the back, gazing out at the streets, lost in thought. More stops, more passengers. The morning routine unfolded as always. Then, at the next stop, a different energy surged onto the bus. 3 men in sharp suits, their shoes gleaming, their laughter a sharp, cutting sound. They exuded the air of men accustomed to having their way, never having to wait for anything. Their conversation was loud, laced with the easy arrogance of those who believe the world bends to their will. Calvin didn't need to hear much to categorize them. Men who equated wealth with worth, who measured people by brands and bank balances. They strode down the aisle, oblivious to anyone else, still talking, still laughing. As one brushed past the older man's seat, he stopped. The shift in atmosphere was immediate. The man in the suit glanced down at the older veteran, his smirk twisting into something colder. "Didn't know they let fossils ride in first class," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The older man didn't react, just stared out the window, his jaw tight. But Calvin saw the subtle clench of his hands, the stiffening of his shoulders. Not fear, but pure restraint. Another suit chuckled. "Maybe he got lost. He's a few miles down the road, old man." The third leaned in, shaking his head mockingly. "Don't believe him, he's probably still having flashbacks." Laughter sharp and cruel. Calvin's fingers tightened on the wheel. He'd seen his own father sit just like that. Jaw locked, hands clenched, swallowing words he had every right to say. The first man escalated it, reaching out and knocking the older man's cap from his head. It hit the floor with a soft thud, rolling slightly. For the first time, Calvin saw it, the deep, jagged scar running across the man's scalp. The bus fell silent. Even the other passengers, who had been trying their best to pretend they weren't listening, shifted uncomfortably. No one spoke. No one moved. The man in the suit smirked, but a flicker of hesitation crossed his eyes. Calvin let the thick, heavy silence hang. He reached for the mic attached to his dashboard, pressing the button with deliberate slowness. "Either apologize to this man," he said, his voice even, controlled, or get off my bus. The words hung in the air, slowly registering. The smirk faltered. Excuse me. Calvin turned in his seat, meeting his gaze in the mirror. His voice remained steady. It didn't need to rise. You heard me. The tension was a palpable thing now, pressing against the walls of the bus, filling every inch. The passengers watched, waiting. The man in the suit scoffed, shaking his head. You can't do that. We paid. Calvin's gaze didn't waver. And he paid for his service with blood. His voice was calm, measured, but laced with steel. Your money doesn't buy you respect. For a moment no one moved. Then one of the suits muttered something under his breath, stuffing his hands in his pockets as he turned toward the door. The others hesitated but eventually followed. The bus doors hissed open. The rain outside had intensified, drumming steadily against the pavement. The men stepped out into the storm. As soon as they were gone, someone exhaled sharply. A ripple of murmured approval spread through the bus, quiet but unmistakable. Calvin said nothing. He simply turned back to the wheel, pressing the gas pedal gently. In the mirror he saw the older man lean down, retrieve his cap, dust it off and settle it back on his head. Then for the first time he turned slightly and met Calvin's gaze in the mirror. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Calvin returned it. No words were needed. The rest of the ride was quiet, the weight of the moment settling into the worn fabric of the bus seats. The murmurs of approval had faded, but the atmosphere was different now, charged, heavy with something unspoken. Calvin kept his hands steady on the wheel, his focus on the rain-streaked windshield, but he felt the shift behind him. Passengers sat a little straighter. Eyes flicked toward the back of the bus where the older man remained still, his cap pulled low once more, the scar hidden beneath the brim. Calvin said nothing. He wasn't looking for gratitude, he hadn't done it for that. He had done it because it was right, because a man like that, a man who had already given more than most could imagine, deserved more than silence. The city blurred past. The wipers sweeping slow, rhythmic arcs across the glass. The bus hummed along its route, stopping and starting, letting people off, picking others up. At every stop, Calvin felt eyes on him, lingering a little longer than usual. He ignored it, he had a job to do. When they reached the last stop, the end of the line, the older man finally stirred. He pushed himself to his feet with quiet deliberation, adjusting his coat as he made his way toward the front. Calvin braced himself for a word of thanks, a hushed acknowledgement. But the man simply reached into his pocket, pulled out a small, heavy coin and placed it on the fare box without a word. Calvin didn't need to pick it up to know what it was. He had seen one just like it before years ago, tucked away in his father's things. A challenge coin, a token of respect, a silent recognition from one man to another. His fingers hovered over it for a moment before he finally took it, the cool weight settling into his palm. When he looked up, the man was already stepping off the bus, walking out into the rain, his posture as straight as it had been when he first boarded. Calvin turned the coin over in his hand, tracing the engraved emblem with his thumb. His jaw tightened. He knew what this meant, what it truly signified. And then, before he could process it further, his radio crackled to life. "Brooks, we need you in the office now." The voice was clipped, leaving no room for discussion. Calvin exhaled slowly, sliding the coin into his pocket before switching off the ignition. He had seen this coming the moment those men had stepped off his bus, and he knew exactly what awaited him on the other side of that office door. Calvin walked into the transit office, the hum of flickering fluorescent lights doing little to soften the tension in the air. The walls were adorned with old service plaques and faded safety posters, reminders that this place prided itself on order, efficiency, and rigid adherence to policy. It was a place that did not tolerate disruption, and Calvin knew he had just caused one. Lawrence Tate, the transit supervisor, stood behind his desk, arms crossed, his jaw set in a tight line. He was a man who lived by the book, who saw rules not as guidelines but as gospel. He had worked his way up from the bottom and had no patience for anything that risked upsetting the system he had spent years maintaining. His gaze flicked up as Calvin entered, unreadable, assessing. "Close the door," Tate said, his voice clipped. Calvin complied, stepping forward but maintaining a relaxed, unreadable stance. He wasn't about to play defense. Tate let the silence hang between them for a moment before finally speaking. "Tell me exactly what happened on your route today." Calvin met his gaze evenly. "3 men harassed a veteran on my bus. They mocked him, tried to humiliate him in front of everyone. I told them to apologize or leave. Tate's expression didn't change. And they left. Calvin nodded. They didn't have a choice. Tate exhaled sharply, shaking his head as he dropped into his chair, pinching the bridge of his nose. You put me in a tough spot, Brooks. Calvin remained silent, waiting. Tate leaned forward, hands clasped on the desk. We have policies, Calvin. We don't get involved in personal disputes. We don't remove paying passengers unless there's a direct safety concern. What you did today, that wasn't protocol. Calvin's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. Letting a veteran get humiliated like that wasn't right. Tate sighed, shaking his head. That's not the point. The point is one of those men you kicked off. He's already filed a complaint. Says you created a hostile environment. Says he felt threatened. Calvin scoffed. Threatened? Tate's eyes darkened. I'm not saying I agree, but it doesn't matter if I do. Corporate doesn't like bad publicity. They don't like complaints from people who have influence. And those guys, they've got influence. Calvin felt a slow, burning frustration coil in his gut. He had seen this before. People like Tate who claimed their hands were tied, who would rather look the other way than stand for something. Tate sighed again, heavier this time. Look, I know you meant well, but you force my hand here. We can't have drivers deciding who stays and who goes. That's not your call to make. Calvin stared at him. So I should have just let them keep going? Let them tear down a man who's done more for this country than any of them ever will? Tate's gaze flickered for half a second, something almost like doubt flashing behind his eyes, but then it was gone, replaced by that same impassive, bureaucratic mask. You're a good driver, Brooks, one of the best we have. But rules are rules. You're suspended, effective immediately. The words landed like a hammer. Calvin knew this was coming. He had felt it the moment he spoke up, the moment he made his choice. But hearing it out loud, having it confirmed, still sent a slow pulse of anger through him. He took a breath. For how long? Tate hesitated, and Calvin saw it then, the truth. This wasn't a suspension. This was an execution. It's not temporary, is it? Tate didn't answer right away, but he didn't have to. Calvin exhaled, slow and steady, then reached for his name badge. He unclipped it from his shirt, setting it down on Tate's desk with quiet finality. If standing up for the right thing costs me this job, he said, his voice calm, even unshaken, then so be it. Tate didn't respond, didn't meet his eyes. Calvin turned, stepping toward the door. The air felt heavier as he walked out, the weight of what had just happened pressing into his spine. He had lost his job for doing what was right, and yet he felt no regret. What he didn't know was that even as he walked out of that office, his story was already spreading, that by nightfall the whole city would know his name. Calvin stepped out into the cold, the weight of his termination sinking in with each stride. The city had darkened under heavy clouds, the rain now a steady downpour soaking through the thin fabric of his jacket. As he walked toward his car, he should have felt angry, bitter, perhaps even afraid. He had bills to pay, a life to maintain. And yet, as he pulled open the driver's side door and slid into the worn seat, he felt nothing but an odd, hollow calm. He had done the right thing. That should have been enough. But as he sat there, fingers gripping the steering wheel, something gnawed at the back of his mind. Would it be enough? Would anything truly change, or would this moment, the stand he had taken, fade away like so many others? His phone buzzed against the dashboard. He ignored it at first, but then it vibrated again and again. Frowning, he picked it up. Missed calls, 5. Messages, 23. His stomach tightened. He tapped the screen. Bro, you're all over the news. Cal, check your phone. Wow man, you need to see this. They got you on video, dude, and it's everywhere. His heartbeat quickened, a slow pulse of uncertainty rising in his chest. He opened the next message. A link. Without thinking, he clicked it. The video began playing immediately, grainy at first but clear enough. His bus, the suited men, the confrontation. The moment he turned to them, his voice steady as steel. Either apologize to this man or get off my bus. Calvin watched himself through someone else's eyes, watched the way he had held his ground, how the tension had thickened before the men finally backed down, stepping into the pouring rain. The camera lingered on the old veteran, the way he picked up his hat, the quiet nod he had given Calvin. Then the screen cut to headlines. Bus driver fired for defending veteran. Public outcry grows. Calvin's pulse thrummed in his ears. The news anchors spoke rapidly, their voices blending. Words flashed across the bottom of the screen. Viral video sparks national conversation on respect for veterans. His breath came slow, measured. This wasn't just a local story. It had gone beyond Jacksonville, beyond him. His phone buzzed again, pulling him from his thoughts. Another call, this time an unknown number. He hesitated, then swiped to answer. Mr. Brooks. The voice on the other end was deep, steady, controlled. Calvin sat up straighter. Who's asking? Pause. Then, General Henry Dawson. Silence. Calvin's grip tightened around the phone. The general's voice remained calm, but there was something beneath it, something firm. We need to talk. Calvin exhaled, his mind racing, heart pounding with a strange mix of anticipation and uncertainty. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. Calvin gripped the phone tighter, his breath steady, though something deep inside him coiled with anticipation. General Henry Dawson, a name he had only ever heard in passing, spoken with reverence by the old-timers at the corner cafe, muttered with quiet admiration by young Marines trying to live up to legends. The man was more than a veteran, he was a symbol. For a moment Calvin didn't speak, unsure what to say. Then Dawson broke the silence. Meet me at the Veterans Center. 20 minutes. The line clicked dead before Calvin could respond. Calvin exhaled, staring at the phone. There was no hesitation in that voice, no room for negotiation. He started the engine. The Jacksonville Veterans Center was a squat, nondescript building on the quieter side of town, tucked between a shuttered mechanic shop and a diner that had seen better days. Calvin pulled into the lot, shutting off the engine but not moving right away. The rain had eased to a mist, a soft drizzle clinging to the windshield. He could see a few men standing near the entrance, most of them older, their posture still retaining remnants of discipline despite the years that had worn them down. And then there he was. General Dawson stood near the door, arms crossed, his sharp eyes scanning the parking lot as if assessing a battlefield. Even in his late 60s, he carried himself with the gravitas of someone who had commanded thousands, a presence that demanded attention without asking for it. His posture was straight, his face unreadable save for the slight downturn of his mouth, a permanent line etched by time and experience. Calvin stepped out of the car, the damp air settling against his skin as he approached. Dawson's gaze locked onto him. Brooks. General Dawson studied him for a long moment, then nodded toward the building. Come inside. Calvin followed him through the doors, the scent of old books and stale coffee filling the air. The center was quiet, the kind of place built for men who had spent years in chaos and now simply desired peace. Dawson led him down a narrow hallway into a small office. There was nothing fancy about it. A wooden desk, a filing cabinet, a faded American flag mounted on the wall. Dawson gestured to a chair across from his desk, then sat down, his hands folded in front of him. You know why you're here, Dawson said. Calvin leaned back slightly. I've got an idea. Dawson let out a quiet chuckle. You remind me of your father. Calvin stiffened, caught off guard. You knew my father? Dawson nodded. Met him a few times. He was a good man. A damn good Marine. A fighter. His gaze sharpened. Like you. Calvin didn't answer. Dawson tapped his fingers against the desk. I saw the video. Calvin sighed. Yeah, so has half the country apparently. Dawson didn't react to the sarcasm. What you did back there, it matters more than you realize. Calvin exhaled through his nose. All I did was kick some entitled pricks off my bus and I lost my job for it. Dawson leaned forward. No, Brooks. You did something most people are too afraid to do. You stood up when it would have been easier to look away. You didn't hesitate. That's why this matters. Calvin shook his head. It won't change anything. Those kinds of guys, they'll walk into their offices tomorrow like nothing happened. Meanwhile, I've got no job, no paycheck, and a reputation that'll probably keep me from driving a bus again. Dawson tilted his head slightly, watching him. You really think that's how this ends? Calvin frowned. Isn't it? Dawson let a beat of silence pass before reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a folded sheet of paper, sliding it across the desk. Calvin hesitated before picking it up. He scanned the page, then stopped. His pulse ticked up as he read the header, City of Jacksonville Office of Veterans Affairs. He looked up sharply. What is this? A job offer. Dawson's expression was steady. The city has an opening, senior advisor position. Someone to oversee veteran outreach, transportation policies, welfare services. Someone to make sure guys like me don't get left behind. Calvin let out a short, disbelieving breath. You think I'm qualified for this? Dawson smiled. You're the only one qualified for this. Calvin stared at the paper. He had spent years behind the wheel, taking people where they needed to go, never questioning where he was headed. And now suddenly a different road lay before him. Dawson leaned forward, his voice quieter now but firm. You stood up for one veteran that day, but this is how you stand up for all of them. Calvin swallowed hard. For the first time since stepping off that bus, he wasn't sure what came next. And for the first time in his life he had a choice. Calvin stared at the job offer in his hands, its weight pressing into his fingertips. It felt heavier than paper should, like something more than just an opportunity. A crossroads, a fundamental shift in direction he had never foreseen. For years his life had been a predictable routine. Drive the bus, keep his head down, do the job well, go home. But now a profoundly different path had unfolded before him, and for the first time in a long time he didn't know which way to turn. Dawson watched him carefully, interpreting the hesitation in his posture. You don't have to answer right now, he said, his voice steady but firm. But you should know this isn't just about you anymore. Calvin looked up, frowning. Dawson leaned back in his chair, his sharp gaze unwavering. Jacksonville Transit is in full damage control mode. The CEO called a press conference this morning. They're scrambling. They want to make this go away. He folded his hands on the desk. They're offering you your job back. Calvin scoffed before he could stop himself. Figures. Dawson smirked slightly. That's not all. They're also implementing new policies. Protections for transit workers who step in during harassment cases, training programs to handle public altercations with dignity, all because of what you did. Calvin's fingers curled around the paper in his hand. He had spent his whole life believing that standing up for the right thing usually came with a cost, and it had. But for the first time he saw that it had also created change, real, tangible change. Dawson's voice cut through his thoughts. They'll try to make you the face of their reform. They'll want you back on that bus, smiling for the cameras, proof that they did the right thing. He leaned in, his voice lower now, deliberate. But I need you to ask yourself, is that enough? Calvin exhaled slowly. A week ago he might have said yes, might have gone back, taken the job, kept his head down. But now, sitting in front of a man who had spent his life fighting battles most people never even knew about, he realized something. He didn't want to go back. His eyes dropped back to the offer letter. The words blurred slightly, but their meaning was crystal clear. You stood up for one veteran that day, but this is how you stand up for all of them. He set the paper down and met Dawson's gaze. Tell me what I need to do. Dawson smiled, slow and knowing, as if he had been waiting for that moment. He pushed another document forward. First we go to the city council. They need to hear from you. Then we meet with the Veteran Outreach Board. After that you get to work. Calvin picked up the pen, and just like that his life changed. A week later, Calvin stood at a podium in front of a packed council chamber, cameras flashing, voices murmuring, the air thick with anticipation. He wasn't used to this, the attention, the expectation. But as he glanced out at the crowd he saw them. Veterans, bus drivers, ordinary people who had seen what happened and cared. He took a breath and spoke. I didn't do what I did that day because I wanted attention. I did it because it was right. Because no one deserves to be treated like they don't matter, especially not the people who gave everything for this country. He let the words settle, then continued. I lost my job for it. But if that's what it took to make a change, then I'd do it again. Applause rippled through the room. He wasn't a bus driver anymore, he was something more. And he wasn't looking back. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.